Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope today finds you safe and healthy. My name is Kimberly Weisul, and I'm an editor-at-large at Inc. I'll be your moderator for today's National Small Business Town Hall. It's the 7th in a series of weekly town halls designed to help business owners get through the coronavirus crisis. At Inc., we are always looking for ways to support entrepreneurs, and one way we've been doing that is with our ongoing coverage of the stimulus package and other support available to business owners at this time. I'm so pleased that today we're partnering with another champion of small business, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'll be joined by Neil Bradley, the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the Chamber. After my conversation with Neil, we'll be taking your questions, and I'll be introducing a panel of experts to help answer them. Those of you who have joined us before know that we generally get hundreds or thousands of questions at these events, but we do have a moderator working behind the scenes to make sure the questions with the most likes get to the top of the queue. So even if we're not able to answer your particular question, we really do hope that we will answer a question that has meaning and is helpful to you. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Comcast Business for underwriting today's town hall and the information we're bringing to you. For those of you who are not familiar with Neil Bradley, he has over 2 decades of experience working directly with high-level policymakers. At the Chamber, as the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer, he is responsible for aligning the Chamber's overall policy priorities and advocacy efforts. Welcome, Neil.
Hi, good to see you again, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for joining us. It is great to be chatting with you again. I'm confident that we're going to get a lot of good information out to our business owner audience. We have been talking a lot about these paycheck protection loans. In the event, we've got someone who is just coming to this for the first time, hasn't read up on the loans yet. Can you tell us just in a couple sentences what those are and why we're so obsessed with them?
Sure. It's a loan program for small businesses with fewer than 500 employees, also the self-employed and independent contractors. The amount of money you can borrow is based on 2.5 months worth of payroll. And the really nice thing about these loans, which by the way, you get through banks, your local banks or credit unions, is that if you spend the money on certain expenses, payroll, utilities, rent for your business, the loan can be forgiven. So that's why it's such an attractive product that we spend so much time focusing on.
So this week, there's been a lot of talk about possibly changing some of the rules around those loans. And unlike the first tranche of money, there still seems to be money left if you don't have a paycheck protection loan. So let's start with some of the clarifications that we've received. And this actually addresses one of the questions that has already come in through the Q&A window, the problem of business owners who want to reopen, but their employees don't want to come off of unemployment. So they've got the PPP money. They can use it to pay employees, but the employees don't want to come back. We have some options now for business owners. What did we learn this week?
This is a great clarification that came out of the Treasury Department and the SBA. In short, what it says is that if you're an employer, you've laid off an employee, you want to bring them back for purposes of your PPP loan and making sure you're getting that maximum loan forgiveness. If you, the employer, issue a written invitation to invite that employee back to work, their same job, same salary, and that employee declines your written offer to return to work, then you won't be penalized in the PPP loan forgiveness calculations. Before this clarification, we were really worried that small businesses would lose part of that loan forgiveness through no fault of their own. What this says is, as long as you extend that written offer, the employee declines to come back, then you don't have to worry about losing that portion of your loan forgiveness.
Now, do you have to hire someone to take that employee's place, or is that spot just kind of reserved?
Well, and this is one of the areas where we want even more guidance, and we're still waiting for further clarifications. What we know is, and remember, this is a 2-part test for loan forgiveness. The first part of the test is how much money did you spend on payroll, utilities, the rent, the things I mentioned before. The second part of the test is, did you maintain your employee headcount and did you maintain wages? You didn't cut them by more than 25%. We know this clarification protects you on that back end, that reduction in employee headcount. Based on what we know so far, we still think you may need to maximize your loan forgiveness to continue to spend that money on wages. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the same employee. Doesn't mean that you couldn't spend some of it on rent, for example, or utilities, but at least it protects you on that back end question of, did you reduce headcount?
Okay, that's awesome. So you mentioned that we're still waiting for more guidance. I think it's almost 2 weeks overdue at this point. Any idea what's taking so long and why, we're not getting what we need?
Well, yeah, I think this has turned out to be more complicated than they anticipated when they set that deadline to provide the loan forgiveness clarifications. Lots of issues like the ones we just talked about have come up. I really think we are going to see it in a matter of days. We continue to give input to Treasury and the SBA. What we hope above all is that they issue it soon, and then whatever it is, it's clear and they stick to it. All these constant changes make it really hard for businesses to plan. So I'm okay if a couple days delay means that we don't have to deal with constant changes.
So I know this is a little bit speculative, but like one of the rationalizations I've heard is that as they're trying to put out the guidance, they're sort of better understanding the effect that this virus is having on the economy, and that the guidance might turn out to be more generous than we would have thought. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, we've already seen that to be true. The issue that we were just talking about employees not coming back, the original act as it was contemplated and as we all understood it, there was no forgiveness for that. And so they are adjusting the rules to reflect the duration of the shutdown and the challenges that small businesses are facing. So in that way, I think that's positive.
Excellent. Great. The other thing, there's still money left in this program. We had thought that by now, if you had not applied for a Paycheck Protection loan, it would be too late, but it's not. Would you recommend people to join the application queue if they haven't already?
I would. If you think this program makes sense for you and it makes sense for your business, there is no reason not to contact a lender and begin that application process. There is money left. We don't know how much longer it's going to go, but as of this morning, Friday morning, there was still funds in the program. So if you think it makes sense to you, pick up the phone, shoot off an email, talk to your lender, get the process moving.
Why do you think it's lasting longer this time?
Well, I think there are a couple factors. The average loan size has come down dramatically. We anticipated that happening. I think we talked about it on one of our prior programs. So you're now getting small businesses, independent contractors, where we're talking about no employees or just an employee or two. That brings down the average loan size. So even though they're processing more loans, the money goes farther.
Got it. Another thing that we're hearing about is people are wondering, now they have a loan, they sort of got it maybe without thinking too hard about it, just like, here's some help, I better get some. They're thinking about giving it back. When would that make sense? It seems crazy to me, but tell us why that might make sense, or if it does at all.
Well, it could, given particular circumstances. So we've all read in the papers the scrutiny on some particular borrowers. These generally happen to be publicly traded companies, for example, or well-known household names, the Los Angeles Lakers, for example. We also know that Treasury's announced that they will audit all loans above $2 million. They're also paying particular attention to loans taken out by firms that have private equity backing or venture capital backing. And one of the questions that they're posing is, did you really need this money? Because you remember, when you fill out that PPP loan, you attest that the economic conditions necessitate the loan. And so what we're hearing from folks is they're concerned maybe about that scrutiny, or even better, and I've heard this is actually on the good news front, businesses who thought their economic conditions were going to worsen and they were able to adjust their businesses in a way that maintained their level of revenue. And they're saying, listen, we figured out a way to move forward. We're going to give the money back. That's a really great thing to be able to do if that describes your situation. And I know there are businesses out there that is exactly what's happening to them, and they're giving the money back.
All right, there's got to be no happier reason to get the money back. I love that. It seems like this choice is a little bit more complicated maybe for people who already have laid off some of their staff and have them on unemployment, right? Because somebody is, to some extent, taking care of those workers already. So how should they think about this?
Well, if you've laid off employees because of the economic conditions, then you do qualify, right? So that's exactly what the program was intended to help you with. You don't have revenue coming in, therefore you can't pay your employees. This was designed to help you be able to keep your employees on a payroll. So if that describes your situation, you should feel pretty comfortable. Now, I would recommend you do a couple things, right? One of the things I recommend that businesses do if they're worried about being questioned about this, go ahead and document the conditions that you were worried about. Canceled orders, things that didn't go through, canceled events, and so that you can feel comfortable knowing that if anyone ever comes around after the fact and asks, did you really need this loan? You can show them some of the documentation about the situation you were facing at the time you applied.
That's great advice. Thank you. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of conversation and agitation to change some of the terms of these loans and the forgiveness. So let's just talk about these and maybe discuss what would be required to change them and maybe, handicap a little bit. So I guess the big one is extending the 8-week loan forgiveness period. Why would we want to do that, and how could it possibly happen?
So this is one that would take an act of Congress. Congress would have to change the 8-week rule. We know that there's interest among some in Congress. I wouldn't describe it as overwhelming interest yet, so don't bet that this is going to happen. But there are some members of Congress who are arguing and making the case that the 8 weeks doesn't really make sense if people were closed initially, for example, under a stay-at-home order, or it's just taking them longer to ramp up, and therefore extending that period might be more accommodative to the small business borrower. All of those arguments may be true, but I just want to caution folks. It takes an act of Congress, and so you should not assume that that's going to change. Your baseline assumption should be the law is going to remain as it is until you see the president signing something that changes that law.
Also, that 8-week loan forgiveness, it seems like the rationale for extending it is my employees aren't working during this time. And it seems that the intent of the law is actually to pay them when they're not working.
That's exactly right. It's counterintuitive, but this is exactly what Congress intended. They viewed this program as an alternative to unemployment. And so they understood, they appreciated that a small business might be paying employees who aren't able to come to work, who are at home, but they wanted that employee to remain connected to that business. And so they were okay with that, and that's their intent. And I'm not sure they're going to change that at all.
Right. How about potentially allowing more than 25% of the loan to be used for something other than payroll and still get it forgiven?
I think this is more likely, and I think this could either change because Congress mandates it or the administration acts. Under the original law, the 75-25% split between payroll and other expenses doesn't exist. So Treasury could change that on its own, or Congress could.
Right. So this is something that's in guidance, not law, making it easier to switch.
That's exactly.
All right. And then the other one that came up this week, changing the tax treatment of the loan. Yeah. Can you talk us through what happened there, please?
Yeah. So the IRS came out with guidance that said that you would normally deduct your business expenses. What you pay as payroll, rent, utilities, that's a normal business expense, and you would deduct it. What they said is because this is a grant, a loan that's been forgiven, and you're not being taxed on that loan forgiveness, we're not going to allow you then to deduct the expenses that you paid with what effectively was a grant. This is a ruling out of IRS. I'll tell you, there's a lot of members of Congress who are not happy with this ruling. I think that it's pretty high on the likelihood that Congress could change that treatment. In part just to make it easier for small businesses from an accounting perspective of not having to differentiate out what expenses are deductible when and what aren't.
Is there a lot of urgency around this ruling? Because this is something that really, it's going to matter in April of next year.
Yeah, there's not a lot of urgency. And so I think for the very reason you just described. And so I think there may be differences of opinion between the folks at IRS and our elected representatives in Congress. I suspect our elected representatives are going to have the final say at the end of the day. It's just going to take them a little longer to have that say.
Gotcha. We also have the Main Street Lending Program, which is for businesses that were on a solid financial footing and plainly profitable last year. The minimum loan size there is $500,000. we've heard a lot of discussion about when is it going to start? When is it going to launch? But that might not be the date that matters the most to business owners. So can you explain why this is and how it works?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the program's been created by the Federal Reserve. They said we're going to announce a start date at some point in the future, and we're all anxiously awaiting that start date. But if you read the term sheet that was issued by the Federal Reserve, they say that loans that are eligible for participation in the program, and it's loans that are made by private lenders, are loans that were made after April 24th that meet the criteria in the statute. So if this is something that you're interested in, you think a Main Street lending loan might be good for you, you shouldn't be waiting to go talk to your lender. Go talk to your bank. You should ask them a couple of questions. Are you going to participate in the Main Street lending program? If they're not, then you're going to need to find someone else. If they are, sit down and discuss with them the terms of the loan and whether you qualify, and go ahead and start that process with them if they're willing to start that process with you. There's no reason to keep hitting refresh, if you will, on your computer waiting for an update from the Federal Reserve.
Why would a lender potentially not want to participate in this? It seems like the Federal Reserve is taking a lot of risk away from them.
They are, but as you and I were discussing earlier in this webinar, we're frustrated by the constant changes that are coming out on the PPP program. The lending institutions are frustrated by the constant changes. What they'd really like to know is that the rules are set, that they're not going to change, and that they can just go implement them. So I think there's a little bit going on here of, please just give us one set of final rules and let us do our work.
If you do get a loan from the Main Street Lending Program, there's a phrase that says you have to maintain, quote, commercially reasonable attempts to maintain employment. What does this mean?
Well, it means that you should look at your revenue, your business that's coming in, the economic situation, and you have to make reasonable attempts to maintain your employment. What you should not do is go lay off a bunch of employees so that you maybe can pay a dividend, or, which by the way you can't do under the program. You agree not to pay dividends or to conduct stock buybacks if you're a public company. So it's not a strict mandate, because we know that business conditions are going to evolve, and some businesses, there just may not be enough work to support their current employment levels. What they just want to make sure is that you're not artificially cutting employment to do something else.
Got it. And we also have the EIDL loans, which has been a lot of confusion around. And it seems like there have been some changes there as well, both on the maximum loan amount and then some different treatment for agricultural businesses. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, so you'll remember this is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program run by the SBA. It's the same program that we use when there's a hurricane or an earthquake or a tornado. Businesses are injured, they can go to this program. They expanded it to cover businesses affected by COVID-19. As a result of that, they had an avalanche, if you will, of applications to the program. They initially stopped taking applications, and all these are run through the SBA website. They are saying that they are processing the backlog of loan applications that they have already received. We know that they are telling borrowers that rather than the $2 million, up to $2 million that a small business could normally get, they're only going to approve loans up to $150,000. And then they've also said, we won't accept any new application except from agricultural entities. So if you're not in the agriculture sector, you can't apply right now. If you've already applied, our understanding is that loans won't exceed $150,000.
Okay, and were agricultural entities included before?
They were. I think there was some concern expressed that maybe they hadn't gotten in early enough, and this was an attempt to make sure that agricultural interests had an opportunity to apply. That's at least what they say.
Okay, all right. So we'll take that for thank you. I know. What do we say? That's what they say. That's what we got. We got to run with it for now, right? Thank you. One thing we always try to do during this conversation is give people a look forward, since we're expecting other stimulus, but we don't know what it's going to look like. So what are you expecting in terms of new legislation that could help business owners?
So we are going to have new legislation. We are going to have a quote phase 4 bill. Democrats in the House are already working on their version of a bill. Republicans in the Senate, they're in the majority in the Senate. Democrats are in the majority in the House, are working on their version of a bill. We've all seen this play before. So they're each going to write their own version. They're going to disagree with the other version, and they're going to fight for a little while before we get to a compromise. So this is not going to happen quickly. If we see legislation being enacted by Memorial Day, that'll be fast. I think it'll be probably slightly after Memorial Day before something gets done. It will, in my opinion, include additional assistance for business. I don't know, however, that we can assume that it's simply a clean extension or replenishment of the PPP and EIDL programs. I think given the amount of time that Congress has and what we've learned about what works and doesn't work with these programs, and the concern about overall spending, that they're probably going to tailor the programs, maybe make them more targeted. So assistance may be coming, but just don't assume that we know exactly what it's going to look like.
And while Congress is working that out, many states are allowing some level of business reopening to occur. And business owners are finding that they have regulations from their town, from their county, from their state. So how should they begin to navigate this? So this is going to get complicated fast.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So we currently have 29 states that are in some form of reopening. They all have their own reopening plans and requirements. If you go to uschamber.com, we actually have a map. You can click on your state, you can see some of the top line requirements, and then you can click through to the order from your state. Be aware, if you're in a major metropolitan area, a lot of cities and counties also have their own guidance. We haven't been able to collect all of that yet, but you'll want to pay attention to that. And, some of it's very common sense stuff, maintain 6 feet of distance. Some of them are strict requirements, no more than 25% occupancy for a retail store or a restaurant, or in some states, even office buildings. There's some requirements in some states about doing a health survey of your employees before they come into work. In another state, you have to do it when they come to work and when they leave work. And so you're going to want to pay attention to these things. Make sure you're following the guidance. Stay up to date. That's a great resource on our website to at least get you started in that process.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is great advice. We really appreciate your thoughts here. I'm happy now to turn to our panelists. Thank you to all of them for joining us today. I'd like to start with Sarah Jennings, who has joined us before. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, she is CPA, director and principal of the firm Costerisan. We talked a little bit about clients who are potentially giving back PPP loans. How do you advise your clients to think that through?
Yeah, we absolutely have been getting this question a lot, and I think Neil said it perfectly. Just document your thought process. If you have things to think about, if you have access to other funding sources, if you already have lines of credit established, things like that, that's something to consider. That's not a cut and dry, yes, I should take it, or yes, I should give it back. Consider, is your business declining? Consider your geographic region. Is it something that your state has extended the stay home, stay safe order like Michigan just recently did? Or if it's not, I mean, all of these things, it's a little bit of a challenge because there isn't a checklist like most people want to see. Well, here's the answers to all of these questions. It's yes or it's no, I have to give it back. It's not like that. And I think that Neil also said, when we all heard about the PPP program and the applications were opened up, everybody was uncertain. Everybody could absolutely say they were nervous what their business was going to look like in the next month, 2 months. So, but primarily document the rationale. It is a owner management decision. If you are truly struggling, if things are different than you had anticipated, as I think Neil mentioned too, they opened up the date to give the funds back to May 14th, I believe. So you've got a little bit more time to kind of think about the decision.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to go now to Michelle Sori Robinson. She is the president and CEO of the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council. Thank you for joining us again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So how should retail businesses think about reopening? We have had a few states where it's like they had a reopening and no one came. How do you make sure that that's not a money-losing thing for you as a business owner?
Excellent question. I have to say, as retailers, you already know that the two key constituents that you must pay attention to are your employees as well as your customers. At the end of the day, you have to enact standards that are actually going to help both of them feel safe. I think some of the brilliant things that I see in the marketplace that are happening now as retailers learn to pivot. Number one, you bring your employees together. As they were just sharing with the PPP loans, I have had people say, if I have all of these employees and I'm paying them, but I don't need all of them in the workplace if we've been able to reopen. And then those that are in states that haven't been able to reopen, how do you leverage them? And how do you ensure that you start to teach them about the training protocols, necessarily the cleaning protocols that will be necessary? So start to leverage them to look at things like digitization, look at your website, look at contactless delivery options, whether that's through leveraging a carrier or through allowing curbside pickup. All of those things are the way that you actually take care of your employees, but also begin to really take care of your customers by pivoting.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome Julie Levinson Werner. She's a partner at the law firm Lowenstein Sandler.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Thank you for joining us. I'd love to know your thoughts on how businesses can start to put together a safety protocol for their returning employees.
Sure. So I think in the past, it's interesting, the discussion has sort of pivoted. In the past, I'd call it 2 weeks. We've started to get a lot of increased inquiries about, okay, how are we going to return? What should we be thinking about? And I'd say, I mean, the main issues, you're trying to reduce risk to your employees, obviously, and you're trying to reduce risk to the company. And I think those sort of interplay. And by developing a protocol, thinking about whether or not you're actually able to open yet, but it's going to take time. So things like, are we going to be taking temperature? Are we going to, when everybody walks in the door, we have to have one common area, and are we going to, what is our position on that? And if we are taking temperature, who's going to do it? And how's that all going to work? And what are the legal considerations? And once we get people in the door, obviously all these things about social distancing. So where and how are people going to sit when we have this trend towards open seating plans? Well, how do we reconcile that now with the fact that nobody wants to be near each other? And so developing a plan, documenting the plan, thinking about all these things. People, unfortunately, may still get sick. How do we deal with those issues? All of these things, it's twofold. It's coming up and thinking of these things, and it's documenting. And I know documentation, I've heard earlier, comes up in a lot of ways. The more that your employees feel, and this echoes, I guess, what Michelle also has said, the more that your employees feel that they're being protected, that they're being heard, the less likely they are going to go external to OSHA, to other third parties to complain. Social media, we can see the immediate impact social media can have in ruining a business and its reputation. So the more that you can have a dialogue and communicate with your employees about what you're doing and get their input, I think the less risk there is both to the individuals as well as to the company as a whole.
Thank you very much. And today we also have Christel Slaughter. She is the CEO of SSA Consultants. Welcome, Christel.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so if this is sort of a related question, if you are in a business that has been able to open and to continue to be open because your employees have been working well remotely, how do you decide whether and when to ask them to come back to an office and work together in person?
That's a great question. And I really like the words whether and when. We do have a lot of clients in this situation, and we're working with them now to come up with plans, just as Julie and Michelle referenced. I would agree that employee safety is number one, and I would hope that our small businesses and even large businesses that may be joining us today have been staying in touch with their workers, whether they've been closed and working remotely, open, at least having a supervisor or manager, if not the CEO or president, personally calling, chatting, using Teams or Zoom, and finding out what's going on in their employees' lives. Because I think that these are the times, this is really a test for businesses, and especially small businesses. And those who are going to pass the test are going to create better cultures, more loyal employees, and these are the kinds of things that are going to do it. A recent survey showed that just as our other panelists have said, people want to see a few things, whether they're coming into their own place of business, coming back to work, or going to shop somewhere else. They want to see that when they walk in, there are hand sanitizing and sanitizing equipment by the entrances, maybe also by elevators. They want to see people sanitizing. And so our clients are dealing with, how do we go back and maybe put additional people on staff or develop those protocols for sanitizing high touch areas or frequently used areas. And then they really would like to see a certificate. How many people have been tested? What have we done? Do we have protocols like temperature checks? And is there a third-party public health organization or something, laboratory, that could provide that? Those are things that are really important. I will tell you on a personal note, we have a lot of very young consultants, and the new protocols and social distancing are going to be very interesting because we call them sardines. They love to sit very close to one another and gather in one office. And they are now talking about, we need to stop doing that and sort of spread out. So moving chairs, tables from break rooms, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things. And your employees can help with that. They can help you design that.
Yeah, we are looking at some big cultural changes. So thank you very much. So we have a question for Sarah from our Q&A from our audience. This is about independent contractors and sole proprietors. Unfortunately, there's been a lot less guidance available to them, but we're going to do our best we can here. This is from Mindy, and she says, as an independent contractor and sole proprietor, for the purposes of loan forgiveness, how do you document the cash you draw from the PPP loan? As the intention of the loan is for payroll, but in her case, there is no true payroll. So Sarah, how do you look at that?
Right, I would recommend doing the same thing that you would over document. So we talked about documentation before. So you really want to make sure that you can clearly see whether you maintain a separate account that the PPP funds came in or not. That's up to you. An Excel schedule would work. But really, you're looking at what you would have made in the last year. And the most conservative thing that you can do is look at 8/52 of the last year. So you're looking over the next 8 weeks from the date your loan is funded. What would you be making? And you can pay yourself that. I put pay in quotes because, you know, we're obviously, again, you're not really paying yourself, but that's what it would amount to.
Got it. So you might put that PPP money in a separate account and then withdraw from it.
Right. Yep. That's the easiest way to track. And again, your goal is to make it as easy as possible for the lending institution to forgive it. So you want to make it completely transparent, over document, over communicate what that is. The other thing for Schedule Cs, I mean, if you're looking at your Schedule C, obviously you're not going to have a Schedule C for the 8-week period, but kind of mock up a Schedule C, see what all of those expenses are for, and that will also help to guide you as to what's allowable and what's not and how much that would be.
Excellent. Thank you. This one, I think we'll start with Neil and then maybe Sarah, ask for your input again from a business that says they're fairly well capitalized. And this, I love that this question has 175 likes because it means maybe some of our audience is doing a bit better. This is from John. He says, I am a fairly well capitalized small business, and due to the economic uncertainty of COVID, I applied for the PPP loan and received the funds. I am afraid that since I am well capitalized, I might be penalized for taking out the loan, although I believe we need it for the ongoing implications of COVID. Should I return the loan funds? Neil, what do you think this person could do?
Well, if you believe you need it, I would simply document the reasons that you believe you need it. And so, you know, you have to look at this from a kind of the reasonable man on the street perspective. Someone may look at it and say, yeah, you're well capitalized. But if you say, I'm well capitalized, but look at these things that are creating uncertainty. Look at this lost revenue that I've experienced. Look at the trend lines and how it's moving. Look at how costs are escalating. If you can show them those type of things, then you should do so with confidence. It's this is all about, in many respects, being confident in yourself that you know you've made the right decision, and then being able to, at a later date, if someone ever asks, being able to show them the thinking behind that. So that would be my recommendation.
Sarah,
yeah.
Anything to add there?
Absolutely. And I think that you had a great point, Neil, looking at the trends, and then also work with your accounting team that's either internal or external and look at some projections, because if you can show your thought process in numbers, that means a lot to any financial institution, because they're looking, oh, they're planning ahead. We've had a lot of conversations with some small businesses that maybe they have that line of credit, like I mentioned earlier, but they're really worried to tap into that now because they are doing those projections, and they know they're going to tap out on their line of credit pretty darn quick. So then in their mind, that's another consideration. Do I really give it back when, you know, I still have to keep all my employees on? I know I'm going to have additional money I have to shell out for training and things that some of the other panelists said, training them on the new health procedures and all of that. I don't think it's a cut and dry thing, but I think, as Neil said, just document the reasons and you have a basis to keep it.
Thank you. This next question, I think, is for Julie. It is about the FFCRA, which is a paid leave act that I feel like kind of slipped in under the radar when everyone was watching the CARES Act. So if you could talk about that a bit, Julie. The question comes from Mark and says, can you please explain how and when to pay our employees with PPP funds versus using FFCRA? Yeah, this is complicated. Julie?
Well, I can tell you just generally what the law applies and what it's intended to cover. So starting point, companies presumably have paid time off policies for their employees. Some states mandated, others just sort of as market practice have paid sick time and other policies. The federal law was passed to provide additional time, and so up to 14 days if employees have specific COVID-related illness or their immediate family. Especially the child care is a continuing challenge for many employees because schools are closed, and even as we get to the end of the school year, people are starting to question what about even in terms of camps being closed. So what that law does is it's the company money that's paying the employees, and I understand that there are tax credits available. I would defer, I guess, to Sarah or somebody else can speak to ultimately what tax credits or other, you know, consequences there are, but it's the company money that's being used, presumably, I guess, you know, from these loans as well.
Yeah, Sarah, on the tax credits for the FFCRA, how those balance out?
Right, so there are credits, and that's reported on the quarterly reports that you submit in, so you will get those. It'll be a slight timing delay, but yep.
Excellent. All right, and here we have a really tricky question from Andrea. She says, we have an employee who works 3 part-time jobs. Their business is taking the PPP, and so that's going to get this person off of unemployment. But now they can no longer get the unemployment from their other 2 jobs. And since the paid work that they're offering only supplies them with 1/3 of their income, the employee is pretty mad. How do I deal with that? What options does my employee have? Can they quit their job with us so that their other jobs can continue unemployment? All right, this is crazy. This person is working 3 jobs and the business owner is trying to figure it out, but it's probably not uncommon to have people with multiple jobs. What are the options here? Sarah, I see you nodding, so that means you're putting your hand up. I don't know if you meant to.
I can put my hand up at least to give other people some time. This is a complex question, I think, and I think to be honest, as a business owner, you are incredibly empathetic to be worrying about it because ultimately it's the employee's decision, right? So as was mentioned a little bit earlier, there is, if an employee refuses to come back, even though you say we're offering you employment because we have this paycheck protection program and they refuse, at least you as a business owner know if you have that all documented and in writing that they refuse, knowing this, you won't be penalized according to the new guidance that we got on FTE counts this week. That's a great thing for you. Can they refuse to come back? Absolutely. It's the employee's prerogative, right? They absolutely can do that. From a legal perspective, I would think that Julie has a bit more perspective than I do.
Okay, Neil also, okay, Julie, or also Neil put his hand up too if we want to go to Neil on this one. Yeah, 3 jobs, unemployment, maybe.
Yes, you should remember that Congress created something called pandemic unemployment assistance specifically for this. The rules are different than regular unemployment. So my advice would be to work with that employee and to get them working with the state unemployment office. It might be possible, now it'll depend on a lot of facts and circumstances, but it might be possible that they can return to one job and still maintain partial unemployment for the other jobs. This is going to be fact circumstance based, but you're going to want to ask the state unemployment officials about the federal PUA and how that applies in this situation.
I would just throw in there, thank you, to also ask about work share, which not all states have, but it's the same thing. It's designed for decreased hours as opposed to just flat out unemployment. So that may be helpful. Excellent, thank you. This next one I think is for Michelle and Christel. This person has a small retail shop with no employees, did not get any assistance to pay their ongoing bills, rent, utilities, nothing. Her money's running out. Is there anything that she missed that is still available to her? What help might this person be able to get? Michelle, do you know other sources that this person should look into?
Yes, I do. The first thing I would say is I think we've looked at many federal sources, but I have to tell you, local and state sources, I have seen multiple states where there are state and local resources available. The best way to look for this is through your economic development organization within your state or your small business organizations and associations within your state. There are corporations that have started to invest in funds and others who have come up with funds. So I can certainly say look at the local and state level and start to look for those resources.
Excellent, thank you. Christel, other places that business owners can look if they haven't got any help yet?
Yeah, I think Michelle gave some great resources. There are some grant programs that are becoming available, and a lot of time professional associations know about that for their members. So a retail association, either regionally or statewide or nationally, may have some opportunities for people to apply for grants. Many are, just very simple applications and forgivable. I think also that, we're talking with some of our clients about the opportunity for investment. And there are a lot of people who are thinking, gee, maybe I have some liquidity and this is a time when I can invest in a company, maybe become a minority partner. And so any Chamber of Commerce or business association locally that might know some people who are close to this retail shop owner. And if they have pretty good records and can show that they have a viable business going forward, this is a time, again, it's a test. This is a time where the people who are creative and competitive are gonna shoot forward, and those of us who can't figure this out are gonna remain behind.
All right, thank you. This is a question about pay and meeting that 75% requirement under the PPP loan. So I'm gonna go to Sarah first. This person has been paying I've been paying all my employees 80% of their salary to work a few hours a day remotely. Am I allowed to increase an owner's pay by 15% to meet the 75% requirement for payroll costs while maintaining the 20% pay reduction for employees? Can you do that, Sarah?
I don't think there's a specific item that says you can't do that. I would be careful doing that because obviously it is going to be scrutinized at the end what you're using the payroll for. So the same thing, the same conversation, obviously you also have to be careful about the $100,000 threshold. So if that's now bumping you over the 100,000 threshold, then they're going to throw that overage out anyway.
Okay.
So I would be careful.
Yeah. There's also a question about the EIDL loan. Maybe we'll start with Neil on this one. This person and 150 other people are saying, I applied for the EIDL grant and received $1,000 in my account without signing or agreeing to any terms, which was a surprise. Is this forgivable $1,000 going to be tied to a larger loan? And if so, will I have the opportunity to decline once I've reviewed the terms? Neil, what's happening with the EIDLs here?
The short answer is yes. And so the grants were designed to be an immediate cash infusion. It was supposed to get to you within 3 days. That's clearly not happening, as folks know. It is a precursor normally to receiving a loan, but in the statute, it says that you can keep the EIDL grant, that $1,000, even if you don't qualify for a loan. So if that's your situation, you can decline the loan and the $1,000 grant remains the $1,000 grant. Excellent,
thank you. This next question from Dan is he says he has a bar and restaurant in Michigan. So Sarah, I think this goes to you for geographic and accounting reasons. Says that I have been approved for a PPP loan. Since we are not open by state order and we don't know when we can bring back our employees, can we accept the funds and return them if we don't use them? What are our options?
So yes, you could accept the funds and then return them if you don't use them. Remember that the Paycheck Protection Program is to pay the employees. That doesn't mean they have to be back working for you to pay them. So if you are paying your employees to keep them on payroll because then they aren't going on unemployment, that's the point of the loan. So you also certainly can pay your employees up until the time that it comes in. It's a consideration. What I would consider, you can't push back the start date. We've had that question a lot too. Can I just start my 8-week period once my restaurant can open? Right now, I don't think there's any loopholes to allow that. Once you get the money, the loan is funded and your 8 weeks start.
Great, thank you. Yes, we do get that question and we have it today. So thank you for answering it. Another sort of related one, if a business owner wants a PPP loan to pay the employees only and collect unemployment for themselves, is that okay?
So the business owner is going to personally collect unemployment. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and they're going to use the PPP money to pay for employees. Is that allowed?
I don't know as I've ever been asked that question before. I don't know as it's not allowed as long as they're not getting salary and getting unemployment as the owner. But I would also just say again, proceed with caution because I am not sure. I mean, I feel like that might be scrutinized. I just don't know as it's written down yet.
Okay, so we'll take that as an example of unbounded creativity, right? Excellent. So then a question for Neil says, for forgiveness purposes, is the SBA going to expect us to rehire the same individuals that we may have laid off, or are they just going to look at the aggregate payroll amount and employee count?
So this is an issue where we're waiting on those final regulations. Our anticipation, our full expectation is that they are not saying, is it Neil and Kimberly who worked there before? And if Neil and Kimberly aren't the two people there, then you have a problem. We don't expect that at all. The only areas where the person matters is this thing that we started out with at the very beginning of the webinar. This idea that if you extend an offer to bring an employee back and they decline, that won't count against you. So you shouldn't be concerned that it's got to be the same people in the same positions.
So Christel, on this topic of hiring people back, if you don't need to have the exact same people in the exact same positions, when you go to hire, do you reflexively bring back your own staff, or is there some other way you should be thinking about this?
That is a question that we're getting quite frequently in the last week or so. And I think that you really are trying to balance a number of different factors. If the job takes half a day to train someone on, then you probably can afford to have turnover in that position. If the job takes half of a year to train someone on, keeping that particular individual is of paramount importance. And so you need to think about things like, do they bring customer relationships to the table? And if that person was no longer with us, would I lose those customers? Is there a way to transition that? In our state, for example, the median income is only about $48,000 or $46,000. So someone who goes on unemployment at $44,000, you can't blame them for that, especially if they have child care issues or elderly parents or personal issues that make it difficult for them to continue to work. So I think that we're seeing our clients start to really struggle with this from a practical matter. Our bias is always, if you hired well and you have good people, try and do whatever you can to keep those people. And I think that was the brilliance of the PPP program for employee retention. It will allow you to give a little bit of hardship pay or a little bit of a bonus. I think you have to be very careful and you need to talk to your lender about where those limits are. But a lot of people are very grateful that their employees have hung in there with them or will hang in there with them. And so our bias is to try and keep the people you have.
Julie, can you help us think through who you should bring back when, given that some people will have underlying health conditions or may live with someone who does? How should business owners be approaching that?
Sure. So one thing, just to not to be too contrarian, but one point just to address what Christel just said, Look, obviously this whole situation was not ideal for anybody, but I will say in all candor that we did see a lot of businesses that when they had to identify who they were going to either lay off or furlough, performance certainly was for some of our clients, not for all, but for many a consideration. And so look, now that there is such an onslaught of available talent, I guess I would just at least say, sure, if it's going to take a lot of time and effort to rehire people or train them, that's a consideration. On the flip side, there's a tremendous amount of talent now out and available. And so on the flip side, you know, that should be considered. With respect, though, to your question, so obviously the discrimination laws could play a real consideration, and certainly even in the sense of businesses that want to be well-meaning. Somebody may say, well, this person, she's home and she's pregnant. We're not going to ask her to come back. We don't want to put her in a position, you know, and look, again, it could be very well-meaning, but certainly there could be legal consequences aside even from pregnancy. Certainly anybody with pre-existing conditions or older workers, we're seeing questions, you know, well, can we decline to bring back somebody who we know is ill, you know, has a medical situation or is older? And the answer on that on paper is no. I mean, look, the anti-discrimination laws still apply. On the flip side, you know, again, and I think it's having a sense of, well, what have people been doing in the meantime? And obviously it depends on the nature of the business, but as much as you have remote employees who have been working from home, I think that's the other big issue. We're going to see tremendous cultural changes now. People who say, I've been working from home all this time and I've been just as effective. Why do I need to come back? And so the process of disability accommodation, you may say, look, I need a presence of some people back, but if somebody has a medical condition, I may be required to accommodate them. And that may mean that that person doesn't physically come back to the office, but may continue to work from home as a reasonable accommodation to their medical situation.
Great, thank you. For Michelle, we have some brave souls who are starting businesses right now. They want to know if there is something in place for new businesses to help restart the economy. Where should they be looking? And good luck to them. Yes, thumbs up.
Yeah, I have to tell you, those are the people that will likely see the true opportunity in this crisis. And there are resources there. What I would say, again, is looking at local and state resources. I cannot say it enough. There are incubators that are literally still being started, looking at cost optimization. Anything in the digital space and technology, all of those things are quite needed. We have Silicon Valley partners out there like the Plug and Plays and those organizations that are constantly looking for startups in various categories. So I actually have to say my hat's off to them, but I don't think it's an impossible thing because at the end of the day, when we look at the opportunities that came out of the 2008 recession and the businesses and the sectors that grew, we see many of those still in play today. I think we're going to see the same thing post-pandemic with this. And at the least, I would say, make sure you're focused on digitization. That is the future for the very reasons I believe Julie just explained, and that many of us have learned we can just be just as effective working remotely. I think you're going to see that people are shopping that way, whether they're B2C or B2B.
Great, thank you so much. Sarah, a question about loan forgiveness. This comes from Adam, and he says, if we only use about half of our PPP loan, will the amount we use for payroll still be forgiven?
Assuming everything else applies, you can still have that forgiven. I mean, there'd be considerations at the end. Do you pay the remaining 50% right back, or what do you do? Does it stick around and you continue to use it for allowable purposes? But that doesn't prohibit you from being forgiven.
Excellent, thank you. Another question about independent contractors. Can independent contractors who received a PPP go on unemployment after the 8 weeks if they still aren't able to work due to COVID-19? Can you do that, PPP and then unemployment, Sarah?
So we've had that question a lot because the 8 weeks will be over and then what? And everybody's thinking this is going on for so much, likely to go on for so much longer. And we don't see any reason that it wouldn't be forgiven. We don't see any reason that you wouldn't be able to apply after the period. You just need to make sure it's very clear what period is PPP funded and when you start unemployment.
Got it. Thank you. Neil, a bunch of questions. I know we did touch on this, but they have a lot of likes. They're sort of similar. From one from Bill here. Any discussion in Congress to supplementing the PPP program once the 8-week period is over? My company will be forced to lay people off once our PPP funds run out. What are the chances that more PPP assistance is on the way?
I think it's really hard to handicap, unfortunately. So I think there's a couple of questions here, right? Is there going to be more PPP funding, and are the terms of the PPP going to change? So in the particular instance that you just described, you need both of those things. You need both the money replenished, assuming it runs out in the next several days, and you need the terms changed. That's a lot of changes, I think, for Congress to make in this. I just want to flag, though, for that questioner, they do want to think through the 8 weeks and the reduction in headcount before June 30th in terms of their loan forgiveness. Because remember, it's a two-part test, what you pay in the 8 weeks and then your headcount and salary test. And so they run a risk in that situation of losing a portion of their loan forgiveness.
Excellent. Thank you. We have time for one more question, and this person has added Neil on it. So Neil, you're on for this one. This is PPP forgiveness based on how many people we keep as FTEs or how many roles we preserve? So they're going to pivot. They're going to be restructuring 2 full-time positions, and the people in those positions will need to be replaced. Can our loans still be forgiven if we fire it says terminate the people in the positions, but keep the positions open with the intent to hire to fill them?
So you have to be paying people on the first end on the 8 weeks. And then it is, even though they're moving from a headcount model when you applied for the loan to an FTE model, I don't, in terms of loan forgiveness, which is weird in and of itself, but it is what it is. That's what Congress decided. I don't think you can get the loan forgiveness by having an FTE position that you leave blank. They're still going to count to say, you've reduced the number of FTEs that you've had.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in one more for Sarah. I hope she doesn't mind. This person has a mix of full-time and part-time employees. Will only the full-time employee count be used for the headcount basis, or do part-time employees also count? We're bringing back our full-time staff, but not our part-time staff.
The part-time staff count as well. So in the FTE calculation, they consider, they're going back to the ACA rules, we think, which is 30 hours on average per week. Is considered a full-time equivalent, an FTE. So you then have to calculate on a per pay period basis how many hours each part-time or variable hour employee works, and that will help you get the averages. That's a really, really long question to get in the very final seconds of this, but I'm happy to discuss it further. It's a pretty intense calculation, at least us conservative accountants are trying to make it a very intense calculation. So, but yes, they still count in some way, shape, or form.
All right. Thank you so much for giving a very good stab at that one. I do appreciate it. As I said, that was our last question. I want to offer a big thank you to Neil Bradley and the team at the U.S. Chambers of Commerce, to all my colleagues at Inc. who have worked to make these town halls possible, to all of you for spending an hour with us. I hope it was helpful and productive. And of course, thank you to our panelists. Today, we are joined by Sarah Jennings, CPA, Director and Principal at Werner Costerisan, Michelle Sori Robinson, President and CEO of the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council, Julie Levinson Werner, who's a partner at Lowenstein Sandler, and Christel Slaughter, the CEO of SSA Consultants. I'd also like to thank Comcast Business for their support in underwriting today's town hall and the crucial information we were able to bring you today. We will be continuing to follow these issues closely at Inc.com, so please check there for more updates and coverage. As always, it's a pleasure for all of us here to do everything we can to support small businesses. Thank you again for spending an hour with us. I hope you all stay healthy and enjoy your weekends, and we hope to see you back here next week. Take care.